panel, next panel, is Regulations and Spaces for Press Freedom Advocacy. I'd like to invite the panel members upstage, and then we'll introduce the moderator pretty shortly as well. Let's welcome with a round of applause Eugenia Abu, member, National Media Complaints Commission, NMCC.
I mean, a lot of us grew up watching her face on television literally every night. She's one of Nigeria's frontline broadcast journalists, winning several awards in the field, including the prestigious NMMA Best Newscaster. Guess what? In 1995. So when you talk about veterans, I mean, it doesn't get better than this. So please, let's put our hands together for her.
Lord.
She's, of course, since moved into policy work, government work, but she's still very, very much in the game. Talk about sustainability.
Yeah.
You're welcome, Madam Abu.
Nigeria has the woman, not so. Next coming up is Balarabe Shehu Ileila, Director General, National Broadcasting Commission, Nigeria. Is she here?
I hope he's around. Okay.
Okay, onwards we move. Muheeb Saeed from the Media Foundation for West Africa, Ghana.
Well, Muheeb
Show
Saeed,
us some more love.
he's a journalist and a civil society activist with a combined spell of over 15 years in media, public relations, and press freedom advocacy. It's good to have you on the panel.
Salon is in the house. Let's welcome Ahmed, Sahid, and Nasralla, Sierra Leone Association of Journalists, with a round of applause and a warm welcome.
I think I saw him earlier. There he is, the man in the jacket and the yellow tee. He is the president of the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists since 2019. As a chairman of the National Political Debates Committee in Sierra Leone, Secretary General of a charity, All Works of Life, and publisher of Sierra Leone's only satirical newspaper called Teacher Lemblem. Please let's put our hands together for him one more time.
And last but certainly not the least, Obioma Okonkwo, Head Legal Department, Media Rights Agenda.
You're becoming Nigerian gradually. Obioma Okonkwo is the head legal department of Media Rights Agenda, which is a non-governmental based in Nigeria, and she's spearheaded advocacy campaigns, research interventions, and so much more. You're welcome to the panel, madam.
It must be all the catfish I've been eating since yesterday. Let us welcome now for the moderator to join, the Executive Director, International Press Center, Lanre Arogundade.
Well, Mr. Arogundade's bio, I don't know if we're clapping for her or for him, but let's clap together. His bio is quite intimidating. A lot of us know him. He's widely traveled, a professional journalist, and so much more. But we don't have much time, so let's allow you to listen to this panel. It's over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for pronouncing my name very well. We'll be sitting together for some time at this conference, and if you play that song, this is my guy. I'm sure the two of us will dance together. If you had done that, I think people will have been excited. All right, welcome to this panel where we're looking at regulation and spaces for freedom, press freedom advocacy. I know we had a very long session earlier on, but I believe that this should interest us. So I'm going to try a reverse order, and instead of starting with the panelists, I just want two, maybe three people, just tell me in one sentence, why does press freedom matter? Anybody from the audience? Just a sentence, why does press freedom matter? Yes, sister? It matters because it will grow our democracy. Yes? The press is the conscience of society. They need that freedom. One last question. Why does safety of journalists matter? Can somebody from this side? One sentence. Safety of journalists, why does it matter? I haven't seen. Okay, yes. Thank you. So we are first and foremost human beings before we're journalists. Can we give them a round of applause? Well, I don't know if you've bothered to read some of the images and wordings mounted at the back, but all that you have said corroborates the opinion of some of our resource persons at this conference. For example, Audrey Guazepa professor, who was on a panel yesterday, said that as the maxim underscoring the symbiotic relationship between democracy and media holds, where there is democracy, there must be free media, and where there is free media, the political system being practiced is bound to be democratic. And then Agba Jalingo, well, what do you expect from Agba Jalingo, says the challenge on governments today is not just to create and support a conducive atmosphere for press freedom, but to also institute mechanisms to punish its restriction. I take one more quickly, and this is Mujurayo Oluwatoyin Ogunlano, who says no journalist should be deprived of their right to inform the public or practice the profession. The truth is, citizens often do not have the time and resources necessary to inform themselves about government actions or the changes happening in the environment. In other words, they rely on the media for information. And so, if you also ask people in government, governors, the president, they will tell you, oh yes, free press is needed for democracy. I was at a lecture in Lagos a few days ago. The guest lecturer was the governor of Imo State. And he waxed lyrical, philosophical on why there should be press freedom. So we've set the ball rolling, it matters. But then, why do we continue to have the threats? Indeed, what are the emerging threats against press freedom and safety of journalists that we need to talk about at this forum and possibly seek solutions? This will be my first question to this eminent panel. Take 4 minutes in this first round for you to talk about what you consider as the key threats to press freedom. Part of this conversation is supposed to be on regulation. The DG of the National Broadcasting Commission is supposed to be on this panel, but is very, very absent. I don't know why, but your guess could be as good as mine. So let me start with my dear sister and senior professional colleague, Mrs. Eugenia Abu. Madam, you've heard them talk about, yes, press freedom, but then what are these threats to press freedom, looking at the work you've done? You've worked for a government media, you've been in the civil society, you've been a media trainee. What are the key emerging threats to press freedom that you see? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very delighted to be here. I think it's important for us to put in perspective what these threats are, as Lanre has rightly asked. First, there is the issue of impunity and attacks. There are institutions of the media that are being shut down, and there have been raids over the years. But more importantly, there have even been physical attacks that have brought bodily harm to some journalists, and there have been deaths as well. So that would be one. The second one I would like to say, and this is very much up my street, is the threat to female journalists. Female journalists continue to be at the bottom of the rung in the journalism profession. Reason being that, first of all, there's discrimination against them as women, and then there's discrimination against them as journalists. So it's a tough call. Because it's a tough call, the emergence of digitization has also affected this threat against women journalists. Today, when we talk about safety of women, safety of journalists, we hardly talk about women. Women are in a peculiar field, especially because when you go online now, where there is anonymity, people are attacking female journalists. They are attacking them not because of the news that they have put out, but they're attacking them in order to shut down their voices. And when they attack them in order to shut down their voices, they can insult their husbands, insult their family, abuse them, and threaten them. We have statistics that indicate that there have been those threats to women. The Kwekega report also indicates that there are very few women in this field already, and the ones that are there are now being threatened. When this happens, what you're saying is you do not want the perspective of women in terms of how we view the world, in terms of the prism, the way in which we see the world, the lens in which we used to see the world. I'll give you an example, for example. If you have a rape case and you send a male reporter, you're not going to get much. You need to send a female reporter. So if society, especially within the digital space, is constantly shutting down women, attacking them, it's a big threat. And it's an area that we should pay close attention to. Because the world is such that we're made up of men and women. And once the women's views are beginning to be emasculated, what we're saying is that their views don't matter. And when we say that, what we're doing is we're looking at the world from a one-eye position. We need to have women in the field. There is also the issue of funding. It's not spoken about enough. Media owners have media establishments, and when they put it out there, they don't give enough funding to the organization or to the practitioners. When you don't have enough funding, you are not going to do your work well. When you go out there to do investigation, it will be half-hearted, haphazard, and badly done. You are not going to stay on it because you don't have enough money. You know, when you look at channels across the world, international channels, I'd like to take Discovery Channel, for instance. If Discovery Channel wants to film something like a butterfly, how a butterfly becomes, the reporter is in a hotel for 1 month, just to wake up every morning at 5 a.m. to film that butterfly. But we are expected back here to go and cover that story in half a day. You can't really tell the story. And so for me, that is a real threat to press freedom. Because what you have is a story that's not properly told, that's not well cooked. I'd like to stop here because I know that I have other colleagues who would like to make an intervention.
Thank you very much. Can we please appreciate her? But you did mention something very important, the threat to women journalists. And earlier on, we had a panel that looked at the issue of inclusive reporting, inclusion. Are you saying, therefore, that threats to female journalists also has a way of affecting the reportage of women issues?
Well, I think when you look at it, issues concerning women have always taken the back page. Has always taken the lower end. Matters concerning what they consider bigger issues, politics. So vesical vagina fistula, for example, may not make it in the very important page. And a woman journalist is asked to go and cover food. Food is good, but we have female journalists who can cover quantum physics. So they're relegated all the time. And they're given the areas that are described as not very important news. A woman's position in the journalism industry should be assured because she can cover as much as anyone else, like Christiana Amanpour. So we cannot begin to talk about how this has affected women journalists enough. If there is no inclusion, issues of women will not be told. If you have, as many statistics have shown, in Nigeria particularly, that we have over 70% of ownership as men, over 70%, if not 80%, are men, then it means that women don't have much space to talk about their issues. And we do have issues, we're a population with our needs and our specialties.
Thank you very much. Muheeb, let me come to you. You work for the Media Foundation for West Africa, and I also know that the Media Foundation hosts the AFEX Secretariat, the African Freedom of Exchange. Looking at your work, what would you say are the current trends and maybe emerging threats to press freedom, maybe on at a regional level now, given the kind of work you do? What are those flashpoints that you could identify?
Thank you very much. The last panel, I wanted to ask a question. I tried as I did. I couldn't catch the attention of the moderator. Fortunately, this is an innovation forum or program, and so I'm going to be innovative enough to be able to address the issue that I wanted to put across and still make it relevant to the discussion that we're having. The point is, we always expect the private media to do the kind of hard-hitting journalism that brings results and that solves our problems, and kind of excuse the public media, because we have kind of agreed that as a public media that is funded by the government, it will be difficult for them to ask hard questions of the government. But I think there is a contradiction here, because the public media is funded by the citizens, and we have a greater right to demand good journalism and service from the state media than we have on the private media, because that is funded by a private person who can decide to play music the whole day. Now, whilst we may rationalize this, I think that we shouldn't accept it from government that it will continue to run down and intimidate the state media so that it is not able to give us value for our money. Now, how does this fit into the discussion we're having? I'm simply saying that we wouldn't even be having this discussion if governments were committed to a culture of accountability and transparency. And that is at the heart of the issues that journalists are having right across the continent. The UN Plan of Action for the Safety of Journalists places a responsibility on governments to ensure that journalists are protected, and when there are violations of journalists' rights, governments ensure that there is justice and there is remedy. Unfortunately, because of government's lack of commitment to transparency and accountability, which is also the core business of a very important and public-spirited media, clearly government is going to shirk that responsibility. Now, you will realize that a probing, independent, and critical media house is even more troublesome to the government than the state accountability institutions. And if we know the attitude of governments to state accountability institutions, which is to deliberately weaken them in order to create a culture of the big man and the strong man, rather than the big institution and the strong institution. And so, with this attitude, governments look away when security agents attack journalists at the least provocation. The security agents, unfortunately, especially the police, happen also to be the frontline agency that is supposed to ensure that these attacks are prosecuted. And therefore, as the dominant perpetrators of violations against journalists, the security agents are not really encouraged to pick up issues of attacks against journalists. Besides that, we have the flashpoints of violent extremist conflicts in northern Nigeria, in Burkina Faso, in Mali. And these areas are difficult for journalists to report from. We journalists are subjected to threats. They are subjected to the threat of even being killed or abducted. And we've seen the case of Olivier Dubois, who is a French journalist that was abducted in Mali. We've seen the case of 2 Spanish journalists who were killed in Burkina Faso in 2020. And these countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger also, have also adopted laws about reporting on the conflict that is quite repressive of the media. So generally, across the West African sub-region, we really don't have very good news to report. On the contrary, even the poster countries of Ghana, Benin, and Senegal are also retrogressing as far as safety of journalists and press freedom is concerned. I think I'll end my preliminary observations here.
Thank you very much. I think that's a bit worrisome, the trend that you've painted. Well, as a matter of fact, few days here in Nigeria, a female journalist with, her name is Mrs. Fresta Anthony Wakucha, is Director of News of Rivers State Broadcasting Corporation, was abducted on her way back to work in the presence of the husband. And the latest we had was that they were demanding a ransom of 150 million naira. And that also speaks to the fact that we have big challenge even catching up with the rate of attacks on journalists. Anyway, so Muheeb mentioned something in his contribution. He talked about justice and remedy. And I will come to you now, Obioma, because you are a lawyer, and you work with media rights agenda. And to what extent can we say that the legal environment and perhaps the regulatory environment are part of or contribute one way or the other to the threats to press freedom and safety of journalists? Over to you.
Thank you. I think I would like to first start with for the fact that before, what we know is what we call the traditional media. Since we are talking about innovation, I think I would like to talk about the contributions that innovation has actually done to the media sector right now. And that is when we are talking about digital transformation, which has given, room for a lot of voices to join the media sectors as, individual journalists and what some people refer to as citizens journalists. And just to point out the fact that, this digital transformation also comes with its own problem. It has a positive side, which is, the positive side is that we get to, get the news in real time, and then you can get your news on the go. But however, the implication is that, there are issues of surveillance. Journalists who use this technology are being surveilled right now by government, by state and non-state actors. And then it also gives room for, journalists who carry out what we call investigative journalism to actually have a room to practice. The likes of Agba Jalingo, Fisaya Sheyombo, and the likes of Aruna Mohammed, who is here in this room, they all carry out investigative journalism. Just to, go way back in time. Fisaya Sheyombo as a person carried out an investigation, in 2019 around the Nigerian Correctional Service. How corruption was eating up the service as a point. And due to this investigation, he was actually threatened, and there are a lot of issues around that. And now looking at the threats that are surrounding the works that journalists do, which sometimes has to do with killing, adoption, like some of the speakers have actually pointed out. And then arbitrary arrests, which Haruna Mohammed has been a victim of, Agbajalingo has been a victim several times. Then let's look at what is the contribution of the regulation to these threats. I would like to state that, regulation only is not the problem. We have what we call the social problem, the political issues, and then the social issues and the economical issues. So talking straight to the regulation, I'd like to start with Nigeria as a country. Mr. Mujid has talked about the Section 22 of the Nigerian Constitution, which gives, the duty to journalists to hold the government accountable. But to what extent is that justiciable in Nigeria? This is not a justiciable section, because Section 6, subsection 2, 6C rather, of the Constitution actually says that that cannot be approached in the law courts. Then let's talk about the provision of Section 39 of the Constitution of Nigeria. It gives the right of freedom of expression and says that anybody can, own a media organization as long as you get the license in Nigeria, just not to sound as a lawyer. And then why we are so concerned about why is the government trying to suppress the media? One issue is because the media stands as a watchdog for the society. They hold them accountable. And then there is a need for them to suppress them. And in doing this, they hide under the disguise of, national security issues, trying to control misinformation and disinformation in the society. And, over the years, the Nigerian government has used, Section 24 of the Cybercrime Act to charge journalists before the courts. And I can say categorically that even when the ECOWAS court has declared that sections as unconstitutional and has directed the Nigerian government to amend or probably to repeal the section, till date, we still find that the Nigerian government are still, arresting journalists and charging them to court under that same section. And also to look about, the Nigerian Criminal Code Act, Agbajalingo in 2019 was a victim who was charged under Section 59 of the Criminal Code Act, which talks about false news and fake information. So what does this do generally to the, journalists? One is that it gives this fear. It gives a chilling effect on the media sector, the journalists, who are to be a watchdog. Because one thing that we have found out over the years is that it's not as if the government actually wants to prosecute these cases. In most times they do. But as a way of gagging the press, as a way of telling them you need to back out, you don't need to do this story, you need to retract what you have posted outside. They just file these cases and then they hang these charges over these journalists. Haruna, for instance, has been a victim and is still going to court regularly. And then one thing that this does to the journalists is it kills their morale. Because as a journalist, one, you have to get a lawyer for you to be in court. You can't represent yourself. So you have to get a lawyer who is going to represent you. So this has to lead to costs. Then, you have this charge over you. For instance, if you are supposed to be an employee, and then your employer is telling you, just say sorry. And you are saying, no, I know what I've written. It's just the truth. So it leads to an issue of you being on the point where you have to lose your job. So this becomes an issue. And then I feel that this is an issue that we need to address generally. I think I'll stop here, and then later on I'll go ahead.
Wow. The applause speaks for itself. You've really, talked about a number of issues there, particularly touching on the role of employers. Before I go to their brother from Sierra Leone, Muheeb, I will just come back to you very quickly, maybe in about 2 minutes, because Obioma talked about the provision of the Nigerian Constitution, Section 22, that says the media should monitor governance and hold government accountable to the people. Now here in Nigeria, we used to make a revered reference to the Ghanaian Constitution because it establishes the National Mass Media Commission. It says government shall not appoint editors of state media. It expressly provides for press freedom and the right of access to information. So, looking at that, how is the situation? Has it really given some reasonable, protection, or do we still have these threats despite, those, constitutional provisions? Because this is one direction we think we can go in Nigeria, and it would be good for us to be enlightened on, possible obstacles. Can you quickly speak to that?
Well, I think that generally, in terms of the legal framework, Ghana has a very progressive set of laws. As you said, we have the National Media Commission, which is independent, and that is regulating the media space. Our constitution also guarantees press freedom, and defamation has also been decriminalized. We also have the access to information or right to information law, and a commission that oversees the implementation of that law. Unfortunately, I think that the present administration, the current president, who played a key role as Attorney General when criminal libel was being repealed, and who has also passed or supervised the passage of the access to information law, was expecting that the Ghanaian media will reciprocate with obedient journalism. Unfortunately,
mind your language.
Unfortunately, he didn't get that, and there is a real frustration on the part of government. It is reacting very intolerantly to criticisms and critical journalism, and there is a rollback of the gains that we have made over the years, to the extent that from being the #1 country in Africa as far as press freedom is concerned in 2018, Ghana currently it's somewhere 13th on the continent. That tells you how we have.
So we have the challenge of rollback.
So the point is that the laws might be there, but if there is no commitment on the part of the authorities to ensure that the media is free to be able to do their work, it is still going to be just a paper tiger. It's the same thing we've realized even in Benin, for example, where the media law actually repealed or abolished detention and criminal prosecution for certain media offenses. Then in 2018, they introduced the digital code and reintroduced criminal prosecution and prison sentence of up to 2 years for the same kind of offenses that the media law had protected against. So you have a situation in Benin now where the same material will be ignored if it were published in a newspaper, and yet would be punished if it is published online. And we have been fighting our government in Ghana recently because we've realized that they are now using the Electronic Communications Act and the Criminal and Other Offences Act, especially on the issue of publication of false news, to prosecute journalists. So unless there is genuine commitment,
we'll come to that.
Government will always find a way of.
Thank you very much. Can we please appreciate him for his insightful contribution? We're going to talk about what is to be done shortly, and you talked about Benin Republic, Ghana, and usually we talk about global best practices, but it seems as if around us we seem to tend to have regional bad practices, really, because even in our National Assembly here, there are laws that have been introduced or existing laws being amended to give regulatory bodies draconian powers and so on and so forth. So it shows that somehow we do have common problems. However, maybe Sierra Leone could be a standard of best practices. Maybe Sierra Leone is different. So I'm coming to you, Ahmed Sahid. I know that recently you had your general elections. In 2015, 2019 here in Nigeria, and even the last general elections in 2023, we documented so many cases of attacks on journalists, some who were accredited by the Electoral Commission to cover, the elections. It would be good to know from you what the experience of, journalists, were, and to see whether, attacks or during coverage of elections are one of the emerging, current threats to press freedom and safety of journalists. So let's have some perspective, from Sierra Leone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I think the problems across West Africa are cross-cutting in terms of safety and security. The usual perpetrators are the police, the security forces, and the army, and the politicians as well. And so when we are going into the elections, what we did as an association, because we knew that safety and security is paramount to us, we tried to prioritize it. And so when we met with the observer missions, ECOWAS, EU, and AU, and the Qatar Center, we told them, for these elections, we want you to prioritize safety and security for journalists. We want you to capture that in your report and make recommendations so that we address impunity and accountability in terms of safety and security. But we are making progress. But the emerging trends that we will see, and that I think it's maybe happening across West Africa, it's not more now from the police, but from the political supporters. Now we have the country is so charged politically, so divided politically, that you are a journalist and you're critical, you are a civil society activist, you're very critical. The supporters come at you, they label you as a supporter of either of the political parties, and they send threats to you, and they attack you. And even the traditional leaders in the local communities where we have the community radio stations, they also now are threatening and intimidating independent journalists who are very critical and who are doing public interest journalism. But another emerging trend, I think they mentioned it right now, is in social media and the digital space. What it has done to the media, and basically it's three things. The critical role of the media, the gatekeeping function, the privilege of creating content, gathering content, writing content, and disseminating. And then the other issue of ensuring that these are the key functions of the media, which we are losing because of the digital space. There is also state capture, which we're not talking about. The government has a way of identifying critical voices and appointing them to government. And then the space becomes less critical. In our country, we have journalists who are supporting either of the parties so that when they come to power, the government will appoint them to positions in government as press attachés or board chairmen or ministers or deputy ministers. That's what they do. And there is also the economy of the media, which I think is very important because the media is poor, the media is vulnerable to corporate houses and also those who will finance their production. Our case is very unique. In Sierra Leone, we have over 500 media houses, 200 newspapers, 200 radio stations, about 25 to 30 TV stations, and a few magazines, 7.5 million people. And the major advertisers are just the mobile companies, Africell and Orange, and the betting company Mercury. They're not advertising. What they do is that they give to the media adverts every month. They give them some money every month just to help them to survive. And then, so those big companies, the media does not hold them to account because they are providing this subvention to them just to let them be published or let them be on air. So these are the critical. And in terms of regulations, we fought for 50 years, 50 good years. LARGE was founded in 1971. It took us 50 years to get the government to repeal the criminal libel law, which has shackled the media for a very long time. And so, next year, the following year, they enacted the cybersecurity crime. And so for all the constitutions, I think from Ghana, Nigeria, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, the constitution guarantees press freedom. But on the other hand, the government liberalizes the space. There is media pluralism, but then they have ways of coming back with legislations to reduce that space and ensure that we don't have the freedom. And if you look at the trend, another emerging trend is that democracy is backsliding. and the civic space is shrinking. You look at the coups in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and in Guinea. That is a concern. That is an emerging trend that we need to look at. Because once those coups begin to creep into West Africa again, then we begin to see the space shrinking and shrinking. I think those are emerging trends and threats that we need to look at.
Very, very, very insightful. Yeah. Very, very insightful. Can we please appreciate Ahmed? Touched a number of fundamental issues, the role, the power of advertisers, how they control the media, what's called state capture, the effect of the return of the military on press freedom, across Africa, the economy of the media, and this speaks to the earlier panel where we're looking at collaboration, media survivor. You have about 500 media institutions in a population of, 7 million or thereabouts. There's a big question mark there, but those are some of the issues, really. Well, from the point of view of the panel, they've been able to give us a number of flashpoints in terms of current trends and threats to press freedom. And I guess what will be expected of this panel is also to begin to talk about possible solutions. What do we do in the face of these mounting challenges that even all our documentations at best? We had seen a documentary by CJID earlier on. We had some. In the course of doing some of our research on safety of journalists, there are 1 or 2 states in Nigeria where journalists don't even want to talk about press freedom because they are being monitored. Sometimes they are called and told, you are about to board a taxi, you are about to do this. So it will be good to also have, experience, sharing, because we won't get the right solutions if we also don't dig deep into, the depth of the problem. And that's why I would pause with the panel at this stage and come, to the audience for you to, intervene. What has that been your own experience? What have you seen? They've talked about digital, surveillance. They've talked about use of terrorism acts. Does this apply to, some of these things apply to any one of us here? So from your contributions, then we'll come back to the panel to now talk about, the way forward. What can be done? What do we do to tackle this problem? So let's see those who want to talk. I've seen one hand there, 2. That hand looks like Agba Jalingo's hands. Nobody wants to speak here. The youth corpers are not sure whether they should speak. Some of you mass communication students, I assume. Okay, I've seen a corper there, and then I've seen somebody there, and then over there. So that's fine. We'll just take, let me start with the last person in the extreme, the person in face cap. Yeah, you take first, then we just go around like this. 2 minutes each, please, because we are really, really running against time. And you have to be obedient to time, not obedient to power this time around. Okay, thank you.
All right, so my contribution and question is that it's really about the Niger Delta. All right, so I'm not talking about the government now. There have been for years there have been struggles around oil spillage in communities, so many communities, and the fear of putting out disinformation is a problem because you become a target. So I'm looking at, in terms of innovation, journalistic innovation.
Target of whom?
Target of putting out the information, because there are companies, big companies,
okay, yeah.
Shell, Moby and all that is causing this oil spillage, all right? And people are dying of cancer in the community. So what's the innovative way of ensuring that AIDS, in terms of resolving these community issues, are brought to the limelight without, whistleblowing anybody and all that? Thank you.
Thank you. So we're looking at how environmental conflict also fuels a threat to press freedom and safety of journalists. Yes, in shirts, in white shirts, and blue. I'm always worried to talk about colors because my wife says I don't know colors.
My name is Nathan Gaduga. I work with Dubawa, Ghana. And I think Muheeb has largely represented exactly what is happening in Ghana. But my question has to do, or it's actually a contribution which follows largely with what the panel from Sierra Leone actually said, which has to do with the supporters or audiences who are very polarized. So in Ghana, there's a situation where before I joined Dubawa, I was with the multimedia group that was largely seen as a media house that holds governments accountable. And so over time, they got a name that became regime changers. So as a regime changer, you obviously had almost half of the population against you. The country is so polarized along two political parties. So immediately you are tagged as a regime changer. The party who feels that your stories are against them naturally becomes a target. So how then do you as a media house, or even as a journalist yourself, who is doing an independent job of holding government accountable, but the people to whom you are doing the work for now turn against you and sometimes beat, harm, throw you? The cyberbullying is also very real, and it also affects the role and contribution of journalists as well.
Thank you very much. I come to the youth copper in the middle here. I saw a hand. Yep. Thank you. Please give it to her.
Good afternoon, all. Sahid Lanre Abigail once again representing the Freedom of Information Act, CDS NYC. Mine is actually a contribution. In Bielsa, I am from Bielsa. We have a group of young people, not necessarily journalists, but people that are practicing media influencing. We have successfully been able to drag the attention of politicians and the people to the cyberspace. In that, when particular situations come up, we are able to use the cyberspace to tackle that situation immediately. And how do we do that? It is by collaborating and understanding the importance of we protecting ourselves as young people. Something happened recently. A company that sells communication gadgets, they normally run this kind of adverts of buy a phone and get a discount kind of thing. And then it happens that, irrespective of the fact that they make these announcements everywhere, they don't follow up, like they don't meet up to their part of the bargain. So they were running a program on radio, and people, like the masses, started calling and saying that I bought this and you did not meet up and all of that. And some guy made a post reporting that the masses said that this company do not meet up to their side of the bargain. I just came on Facebook that morning. I noticed that this boy has been arrested. Why? Because he reported a situation. I was like, what's happening? So I called a few of my friends, and we started bombarding social media with negative stories like release him, and before the end of 24 hours, he was released. Now, how do we achieve these things? The boy is obviously from an opposition party. I support another party, but it's not about the political party. It's about doing the right thing. It's about looking out for each other. It's about knowing that this person that is a journalist like you needs to be protected by you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we give a round of applause? An injury to one is an injury to all. So quickly, we have just three here. Take the two, and then we take Agba, and then we are really, I knew this would happen because the last session.
Mine is just on access to information.
Okay.
I just want to know how can an investigative journalist, manage an information that he's having ahead of security officers, security personnel. We have seen a situation whereby journalists get information that even security personnel don't have. At the end of the day, after publication, they come after you, and then they were like, you are collaborating with either terrorists or bandits or anything. So how can we manage that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I believe the panelists are taking notes. We have him, and then lastly, yep.
Thank you, brother. My name is Ajibola Hamzat. I'm the African editor for Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism. My question is for Ahmed Nasralla. Because
Ahmed, this question
Ahmed
is for
Nasralla, yeah, because you spoke about the state capture, which really interests me because it's an issue we are not talking about here in Nigeria, even though it's happening. And of course, I remember that in South Africa as well. You know, state capture is a very huge issue. So in Nigeria, if I can give you some short background, since 1999, when the civil government returned, you've been having government officials, president to governor to local government, hiring senior journalists, you know, harvest journalists from newsroom and make them special advisors, spokesperson and all this. And they know what they are doing. The idea is to, once you have the headship of the newsroom within your space, you can begin to dictate what happens in that newsroom. And when they work for that government for several years, when you return to that government, already that newsroom is already, you know, compromised. And that is what we have been having since 1990 date. We are not talking about it, but it's a very big issue. My question, Nasralla, is, because you also mentioned that that's the situation in Sierra Leone. So how are you thinking about how to address the state captures as the
capture? Yeah, fight back against. Okay, finally, Agba. Two minutes, 15 seconds of which I've gone already.
Thank you. All right, Ahmed, you also prompted why I put up my hand. My name is Agba Jalingo. You mentioned ordinary people and even traditional rulers that they have become a threat, and I was just prompted to add a third one, that which I haven't heard anybody mention. The one of these threats that we're ignoring is threat from within, our fellow journalists. And I have been a victim myself. You gave me 2 minutes. Let me give you two quick instances. My longest arrest, because there are several of them, my colleagues knew I was going to be arrested in Cross River State, and they foiled my arrest. And the moment I was arrested, it was the NUJ in Cross River that issued a statement with a bold headline, Agba Jalingo is not a journalist. The governor gave them 2 million naira, and they went to share the money in their secretariat. I have the video, I'm not lying, I'm not joking. And the moment they shared the money, they wrote that statement, Agba Jalingo is not a journalist. They kept demonizing everybody that was coming to court in solidarity until the NUJ chairman from Abuja had to give a directive to the leadership to also come to court themselves. And it was like that until the trial ended. That's one. The second one is... Yeah, sir. The second one, recently, there's a tussle over the throne of the Obong of Calabar. And the resident correspondent for Tribune newspaper wrote a story. And when they threatened Tribune from Calabar, they quickly removed the story from the website. And the NUJ in Cross River, the chairman, Gillen, sir, I'm calling names, went to pledge loyalty to the Obong of Calabar, who is on the throne, because the former Minister of Finance, Annie, is also struggling the throne with him. The moment he went to pledge that loyalty, he also went to the DSS himself and told them, I know the boy, I will bring him to you. They invited Godwin Utang to go to the DSS office, and we now told him that, okay, you are a member of the Association of Cross River Online Journalists. Don't go. Let us write the DSS and demand for a formal invitation before you can go. I can go on talking about these things,
please,
but there's even a bigger threat from within. But that is not to also discountenance the effort of very, very credible journalists who fought for my release and the release of every other person.
We have threats from within. Okay, thank you. Can we please appreciate all those contributed from the audience? We would have to round up now. We just don't have the time. And we have to round up this session. There was a specific question for Ahmed, so I will start with you. And it's just your concluding thoughts and remarks. Okay. What can we do, or what can we do better? Because it's not as if we've not been doing anything. We do documentations, we issue press releases, so many initiatives are on. But what are those takeaways, from this session that we can say this is where we go henceforth? So I start with you, Ahmed. I guess this time we will just have two.
No, if possible, let's say 3 minutes more, please.
Thank you. Okay, it's more. All right.
Okay, so let me join the two questions from the one from Ghana and the one and the man over the end. Okay, I'll start with you. Yes, you know the time, so we cannot mention everything. We will leave that for the discussions. Yes, the enemy from within is also a threat. It's an emerging threat to us because that one arises mainly because we have become partisan, the partisan press. You are either here for the government or you are either here for the opposition. And there is a very small group in the middle that decides to pursue public interest journalism. I'll give an example. The BBC media, the BBC correspondent in our country, Muheeb Saeed, has come under many serious attacks. Every now and then, they will send text to him. They will send, the day he reports something that favors the position, the ruling party supporters will come after him. And the day he reports something that is critical of the position of the ruling government, the supporters will come after him. So that's basically what is happening there. And in Sierra Leone, we have a platform called the Independent Radio Network. That is a platform of about 40 to 50 radio stations, including community radio stations across the country. During elections, this is our 5th democratic elections since the war ended in 2002. That is the platform we're using for every elections to pass on information to the public, to communicate in the language that the public, that will reach as many people as possible, because the majority of Sierra Leoneans, the rural population, depend on radio for their information. So that is the platform we use to pass on voter education, to pass on information about what is happening at the polling stations, at the polling centers, and they announce the results by bits. So at the polling station, after the counting, the results go public on the wall, and there are reporters there to send in the reports. And so what they did these elections, they avoided the station because the supporters started to label the station as pro-opposition. And there was one radio station that came out publicly and attacked the radio station, saying, calling on the public, do not listen to this platform. This platform has had a meeting with the opposition leader, so they are compromised. Don't listen to them. And even the ECSL, also the Elections Commission for Sierra Leone, also avoided the radio station. So that's how these things are happening. And in terms of moving forward, what we have done. For us, like you said, the usual reaction was to put out press releases. After a journalist has been beaten by the police or the security forces, we put out press release, condemn the action, and call for investigation. No investigation has been completed 50 years ago. And so when I came in as president, we said, okay, let's change the approach. Let's meet them. Let's go and meet them, yes. So we'll meet the police, and we sat down on the round table, and then we said, okay, you are playing your part in the democracy. We are also playing our part in the democracy. You provide security, we provide information for the public. Why are you always attacking us? Why are you always assaulting us when we are doing our work? And so we came to an understanding, and we signed an MOU that going forward, we will support you provide security, you also support us provide information for the public. And that MOU is what we use to go into the elections. And for the first time in all of our elections, we had no incident of any police assault on journalists, because on the eve of the elections, we met with them, and they told us that advise your journalists, when you go to the police station, your first point of contact is the policeman. Introduce yourself and say yes. Okay, another important one. We have regional groupings, collaborations. We have WAJA, West African Journalists Association. It is dead now. Why? That is a platform that we can use to collaborate and highlight reports on press freedom issues and press freedom development, that we collaborate and share these ideas.
I know you have more to share, Ahmed. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much.
So, Muheeb, just 1 minute. What can we do better to protect the press freedom and civic space? Just one.
Yeah, we realized that we have been denouncing and attacking, and we thought that it is also important for us to go the softer path. So about 2 months ago, for example, a delegation of the Media Foundation for West Africa, led by your own Femi Falana, who is a board member, met the ECOWAS Commission and actually commended them over some of the decisions that the ECOWAS court have made in favor of press freedom, encouraging them to do more, and also encouraging them to encourage the countries concerned to actually implement the decisions of the courts.
Thank you.
We've also had to meet the leadership of Sierra Leone, sent a delegation to meet the vice president of Sierra Leone and the media regulator in Sierra Leone, because it's a country that we've seen is doing well. And we think that it is important to commend as a way of encouraging these countries that are doing well to stay the path.
Thank you very much. Obioma, just your concluding.
Okay, I feel what we can do more is for us to have more advocacy around the issue of press freedom. And I feel also that we have our collaborative efforts. By that, I mean civil societies and journalists and other stakeholders coming together to look for ways to suppress the issue of press freedom within the region. And then on the last note, I feel that one thing that is so certain is that journalists are not really speaking too well about these issues that affect them. And I believe that if you are not speaking about it, then you can get the help that you need. So I would encourage journalists to do more of the talking and also have a way of doing public service announcements about these issues that affect their sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, our dear sister Eugenia, your parting shots.
Thank you very much. I would like to go to the my brother who spoke earlier, Mr. Frank, who was on the panel before us.
Yeah.
And he talked about being sensible. Journalism is not motopark touting. It's a profession. And so if you want to get into it, then you must understand it. You cannot join journalism just because you want a situation where you have more followers. Press freedom is related to your ability to understand what press freedom is. So I want to be a little disruptive. Do you understand press freedom? Do you know the laws? Have you studied it? Is it enough for you to put out a story that is misinformation and consider that press freedom? I think it's important for us to look at the last comment that was made before he left the seat. He's a veteran. And he was talking about peer review. Because I'm a member of the National Media Complaints Commission, it means that the media also makes mistakes. It means that our job there is to prevent us from going to court. And if somebody has been so aggrieved, we have a duty as a member of the National Media Complaints Commission to use moral suasion, to get your comments and then to respond to it. How much education are you doing? I've spent going into 40 years now in journalism. How much knowledge do you have? Particularly we have our corpus in the house. It's very easy to think that journalism is suicide when you hear some journalists speak. That's not what it is. It is to make our societies better. We have a duty. And because we have a duty, we need to look at things that would upset society. And I'm rounding up now in a few minutes. Now, the comment I'd like to make now is for you to realize that there is also the need to build the capacity of the police, security. There is need for us to have a relationship, to meet together and talk about the things that bother us in terms of how they treat us, in terms of what we understand to be our role and their role. You would remember that the BBC had documents picked up at a bus stop. Somebody picked it up. It was about Afghanistan and the Baltic Sea and how troops will move from the Ministry of Defense. And they gave it, this man who found it at the bus stop gave it to the BBC. The BBC released only partial information and said the rest of it is national security. I think some of the challenges we have is that we within the African continent, we do not love our nations enough to understand that journalism is a development factor. It's not about fight. I have issues with the fact that Nigeria has the highest number of journalists being attacked, but we must also be responsible. We must also understand the reason why we are in the profession. We must understand the profession. We cannot come to it from the position of motopark touts. We are doing our job, it's a profession. Let's do it well. Press freedom would be a matter that would be taken on board by people if we respect ourselves. While some of the people in government do not even understand what we do, let us do the job well to the point where we are responsible enough to engage. Because if you come from the position of someone who doesn't even know what you're doing, you don't understand the facts, you haven't done your research, I tell you, it's very easy to put a knife in your back.
Thank you very much, man. So we need good journalism. We need to be socially responsible, more capacity building, more advocacy, more engagement with our government, with regional institutions like ECOWAS, and then speaking out, not keeping silent. Wole Soyinka says the man dies in him, and the woman also. who keeps silent in the face of a tyranny. So we need journalists to speak out more about some of these threats so that we can also capture them. And I know that here in Nigeria, there are initiatives being led by CGID, supported by our respective organizations that we hope will lead to the emergence of a form of national response mechanism on press freedom and safety of journalists in Nigeria. Thank you very much for your attention and cooperation for this highly pressurized panel. We're talking about press freedom and safety. They couldn't even guarantee our safety. They keep threatening me, doing all kinds of things, and I'm used to breaking my head with coconuts. Can we please appreciate our eminent panelists? And are you going to allow us to take the traditional photograph? Oh, we're lucky.